the Vealdar had ruled the stars for millennia. Their power was unmatched, their warriors revered across the galaxy. No race, no civilization, dared challenge them. And yet, deep within their war temples, a command had been etched into stone: stay away from humans. It was a warning that had been passed down through the generations, whispered in fear, as if those who spoke it feared even the mention of the word. Zoren, commander of the dread talons, had never feared anything, not the warriors who fell before him, not the empires that crumbled beneath his boots. But when he heard the command, when he saw it for the first time etched on the walls of his ancestors' temples, he felt something stir within him. Curiosity. It was something the Vealdar had never known. Zoren had risen through the ranks of the Vealdar military with one goal in mind: to dominate. To prove that no one, nothing, was superior to the Vealdar. But this single line, changed everything. To Zoren, it was an insult. How could a race of mere mortals, fragile and weak, hold a command that even his people dared not question? Why? He had asked the council. Why should we fear them? The council had gone silent. Old, battle-worn priests exchanged uneasy glances, their eyes downcast. Finally, one spoke. The humans are different. They are an infection. An infection. The words burned Zoren's ears. He had laughed. A race of soft creatures, so easily crushed underfoot, was an infection? He had scoffed at the notion. The Vealdar had faced far greater threats, and none had withstood their might. No, the humans were nothing. And Zoren was going to prove it. We will see for ourselves, he had declared. I will lead the dread talons to Earth. We will test their strength. And we will show the galaxy once and for all that the Vealdar are the true masters. The council had protested. The high priests had trembled at the thought. But Zoren's will was iron. His desire for proof was stronger than any warning. The dread talons descended upon Earth in silence, their ships cutting through the void like shadows, leaving only ripples in the fabric of space. The humans had no idea what was coming. But Zoren did not fear them. He saw only a primitive species, unworthy of the Vealdar's attention. At first, the humans were exactly what he expected: fragile, weak, and unprepared. Their weapons were crude, their technology laughable. The dread talons tore through their defenses like a storm, their blades cutting through flesh and metal alike. Zoren himself stood at the forefront, cutting down human after human with brutal efficiency. But something felt off. As the battle raged, Zoren couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His soldiers, his elite warriors, were starting to act differently. They weren't fighting with their usual precision. Their movements were erratic, their strikes wild and uncontrolled. Some of them were grinning, a grin that didn't belong on the face of a Vealdar warrior. Zoren dismissed it at first. Fatigue, maybe. They had been in battle for days. But then, one of his best soldiers, a fearsome general named Vear, suddenly stopped mid-battle. His face twisted into a manic smile, and he began to laugh, a strange, hollow laugh that didn't sound like his own. Vear! Zoren shouted, stepping forward. What is wrong with you? Vear looked at him, his eyes wide with something that wasn't madness but something far worse. I see it, my lord, he said, his voice high-pitched. I see what you cannot. Zoren's eyes narrowed. See what? You've lost your mind. But Vear wasn't listening. He turned and charged at one of his own men. The man barely had time to react before Vear's blade was through his chest. A warrior of the dread talons, slain by his own. Zoren's rage boiled over. He rushed at Vear, his blade raised high. You traitor, he roared, bringing his sword down with all the force he could muster. Vear sidestepped with unnatural speed, his grin never wavering. You don't understand, Zoren. They've already won. It's in you. It's in all of us. You can't fight it. Zoren's heart pounded. He had no idea what Vear was talking about, but he knew this: he had to stop him. He couldn't let his men fall to madness, not now, not when victory was so close. The two warriors clashed in a fury of strikes and parries. Zoren fought with everything he had, but Varkel was faster, more unpredictable. His attacks weren't those of a trained soldier. They were savage, wild, as though he was fighting for something far more primal than victory. "You'll regret this, Varkel," Zoren growled. "I will carve the madness from your bones." Varkel laughed again, a laugh that sent a chill down Zoren's spine. "It's already inside you, Zoren. You feel it, don't you? The whispers. The fire in your veins. You're already becoming one of them." Zoren didn't respond. Instead, he struck with a ferocity that left no room for hesitation. His blade cut through Varkel's armor, his eyes blazing with fury. But even as Varkel fell, a strange thing happened. His blood, as it spilled onto the ground, shifted, as if alive, as if changing. "Impossible," Zoren muttered, his hand shaking as he pulled his sword free. Varkel's final words came through a rasping laugh, his body twitching as if alive. "You can't stop it," he whispered, his voice distorted. "You are already one of them." The last of his laughter echoed in Zoren's mind as he stood over the fallen general, his heart pounding. What had just happened? What had Varkel meant? And why did he feel something shift within him? The whispers began. Quiet at first. Soft, like a breeze brushing through his mind. But then they grew louder, like voices calling from a distance, urging him forward. His mind, his very soul, began to twist under their weight. He shook his head, trying to clear the thoughts, trying to ignore the growing sensation that was consuming him. But it was too late. Zoren stood alone in the ruined battlefield, staring at Varkel's body. The echoes of the general's last words reverberated in his mind, and every moment since the betrayal felt like a cruel twist of fate. "You're already one of them." He shook his head, trying to rid himself of the haunting thought. It was nonsense. He was Vear, unbroken, unyielding, above all weakness. Yet, as he wiped his blade clean of Varkel's blood, the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder. A faint pull in the pit of his stomach, like something was trying to worm its way under his skin. He gritted his teeth and clenched his fists. "This is madness," Zoren muttered to himself. The battlefield around him was eerily silent. The cries of war, the clash of blades, had died down as his men fell into disarray. He could see them now, his warriors, once proud and fierce, now staring vacantly into the distance, as though they were lost. Some were fighting each other, others wandering aimlessly. But it wasn't just the disobedience that gnawed at him. It was the strange, unspoken bond forming between his men and the humans they had slaughtered. "What is happening?" Zoren whispered. As if to answer him, one of his soldiers, a younger warrior by the name of Zoren, suddenly dropped his weapon, his face twisted with confusion. "Commander, something's wrong." Zoren's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried an undeniable tremor. "What is it, soldier?" Zoren's tone was sharp, a little more desperate than he intended. Zoren looked at him, eyes wide with fear. His hand trembled as he pointed toward the horizon, where the last remnants of the human forces had retreated. "It's them. They're not like us. They change." Zoren's gaze followed the soldier's finger. His breath caught in his throat. The humans, those they had thought weak, those they had massacred without mercy, were standing up. Their bodies, broken and bloodied, were healing. They didn't move like wounded animals struggling for survival. They moved with purpose, as if they had been waiting for something, preparing for this exact moment. Zoren felt his pulse quicken. What in the name of the stars is happening? Zoren didn't answer. He couldn't. The horror in his eyes spoke for him. A scream shattered the moment. Zoren turned to see one of his closest officers, a seasoned warrior named Malriv, writhing on the ground, clutching his chest. His armor had begun to pulse, a sickly glow radiating from beneath it, and his skin was starting to shift. It was no longer the pale, stone-like texture of the Vear. It had become something else, something far more human. Malriv. Zoren rushed to his side, but his words died in his throat. The warrior's eyes were wide with fear, filled with an expression that was all too human. And then, as Zoren knelt to help him, Malriv's body spasmed violently, a grotesque growl tearing from his lips. "I can't stop it, Commander," he rasped, his voice distorted, unnaturally low. "It's in me, the fire, it's too strong." Zoren stood frozen. His warrior, his friend, was being overtaken. Whatever it was, whatever force had possessed them, it was spreading, consuming them from the inside out. The whispers were no longer just voices, they were feelings, emotions that overwhelmed him with an intensity he had never known. His grip on his sword tightened, his thoughts clouding with rage. "No. I will not fall to this," Zoren hissed through gritted teeth. But the change in his soldiers was undeniable. One by one, his once disciplined ranks were becoming chaotic. Warriors who had been trained to fight with the precision of machines were now lost, their minds slipping into madness. And it wasn't just the physical corruption. It was something darker, something deeper, inside them. A longing, a need to be something else. To become them. Zoren's breath came in short, shallow bursts. He couldn't understand what was happening to his men. Was this what Varkel had meant? The whispers continued to gnaw at him. The fire in his veins, he could feel it now, spreading like wildfire, crawling through his blood, poisoning his every thought. It wasn't the strength of his people. It wasn't the indomitable will of the Vear. It was humanity. The very thing they had come to destroy was now tearing them apart. He gripped his sword, feeling a sick twist in his stomach. The battle was lost. The men he had led, the warriors he had fought beside, were no more. They were being undone, not by weapons or tactics, but by something in them. The infection was spreading. The longer they remained on this cursed planet, the more they became like the humans they had sought to destroy. With his mind racing, Zoren took a step back, scanning the chaos unfolding before him. His soldiers were beyond saving. Some of them had fallen to the madness already. Others were fighting each other, or worse, muttering in strange languages, human languages. It was as though they had all begun to lose their sense of self. He raised his hand, his voice hoarse as he commanded his troops. "Fall back. All of you, fall back." But no one moved. No one listened. He could feel the pull. It was in the air, in the very atmosphere. The humans' influence had already spread far deeper than they could have ever imagined. This wasn't just about battle tactics or strength anymore. This was a battle for their souls. Zoren turned toward his ship, but his legs felt like they were made of stone. The whispers were louder now, echoing in his mind. He was losing his grip. He could feel it, something inside him was changing, and there was no way to stop it. "Commander," came a voice behind him, Vorn again, his tone barely audible. "What do we do now?" Zoren's gaze hardened, but the fire in his eyes was no longer one of determination. It was one of fear. For the first time in his life, he felt it, the primal instinct to survive. He turned to face the warrior. "We leave. Now." Vorn's face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. "But the ship, sir, it's not responding. The systems are down." The navigation, his voice trailed off, his words almost too quiet to hear. Zoren's heart slammed against his chest. "What?" His voice cracked. He raced toward the ship, his mind spinning. There had to be a reason. There had to be a way to escape. The humans, this planet, they couldn't be allowed to claim him, too. But as he entered the command deck of the warship, his worst fears were confirmed. The controls were dead. His fingers flew over the buttons, but nothing worked. His eyes darted to the viewport, and what he saw made his stomach drop. The ship's reflection in the planet's atmosphere had changed. What had once been a sleek, imposing vessel was now twisted, its once metallic surface now corrupted, shifting, pulsing with a grotesque organic glow. The Vear had fought for so long, had conquered so much. But now, in the face of humanity's curse, they were being undone. "Get away from it!" Zoren shouted, but the words were empty. The control panel before him seemed alive, as if it, too, had been infected. The whispers were no longer in his mind. They were all around him. "Commander." Vorn's voice trembled. Zoren's blood ran cold as the last of his warriors slumped to the floor. His soldiers were gone, and the ship was his only connection to the world that had been. He was alone. He was doomed. The truth was inescapable. Humanity wasn't just a threat to be fought. It was something far worse. Humanity wasn't conquerable. Humanity consumed. And it had already consumed him. Zoren's breath was shallow, his fingers shaking as they hovered over the dead console. The once majestic warship, a vessel that had seen countless battles and raised entire planets, now felt like a coffin. The cold metal beneath his palms felt alive, alive with something dark, something human. "Commander," Vorn's voice echoed from behind him. It was trembling, uncertain. He had followed Zoren into the ship's bridge, but now he seemed almost a stranger. There was a fear in his eyes, one Zoren had never seen before in his men. "What is it, Vorn?" Zoren growled without turning, his voice thick with frustration. "The ship won't respond. The navigational systems are dead. We're stuck here." Vorn hesitated, but then the words came tumbling out. "It's not just the ship, Commander, it's all of us. I can feel it. The change. The pull." Zoren's heart skipped a beat. He didn't need to look at Vorn to know the fear that gripped him. The same fear was crawling up his spine, an invisible presence that he couldn't escape. The whispers, once faint in the back of his mind, were now deafening, ringing in his ears. They clawed at his thoughts, scratching at his sanity. They were becoming something more than a distraction. They were becoming an infection. "Enough," Zoren snarled, slamming his fist against the console. The sudden violence of the motion sent a shock through his body, but it did nothing to drown out the whispers. The flames of dread spread through him, an undeniable weight pressing against his chest. Humanity's influence was taking hold. Zoren spun around to face Vorn, his face contorted with the agony of a warrior caught in the grip of a monstrous force. "Do you hear them?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "Do you understand what's happening? We've crossed into their domain. And now, we are no better than them." Vorn's eyes were wide, filled with terror. He opened his mouth to speak, but before any words could form, the sound of a door sliding open interrupted him. Zoren turned to see a familiar figure stumbling into the room, General Cormar, one of his oldest friends, his armor disheveled and cracked. Cormar's eyes, once fierce and unyielding, were now glassy. He had clearly been through the same transformation as the others, his face twisted with an unnatural grin. The same look he had seen in Varkel's eyes. The madness. The infection. "What are you doing here, Cormar?" Zoren's voice was hoarse. "Why have you come?" Cormar's laugh was unsettling, a broken sound that didn't belong to a Veildar warrior. "You're still fighting it, Zoren. But you can't win." He staggered forward, his hands shaking as he reached for Zoren's shoulder. "We were never meant to fight them. We were meant to become them." Zoren's fists clenched. "No. We were meant to crush them. To destroy them." But as he said the words, he couldn't shake the sense that something inside him was already changing. His skin tingled, his blood surged in strange patterns, as if it were no longer entirely his own. The whispers grew louder, echoing through his mind in chaotic rhythm. Cormar laughed again, a high-pitched, maniacal sound. "Destroy them? You've seen them. The humans. They don't destroy anything. They consume." Zoren stepped back, his mind reeling. Cormar's words hung in the air like poison. Was that the truth? Had the Ancient Ones been wrong to fear humanity? Had they underestimated what humanity was? "You can feel it, can't you?" Cormar continued, stepping closer. His voice was low, seductive. The fire, the hunger. You're one of us now, Zoren. Just like all of us. We can't escape it. We never could. Zoren's jaw tightened, his breath coming faster. He couldn't deny the pull. It was as if something deep inside him was awakening, something primal, something human. He could feel the fire coursing through his veins, consuming everything he had once known. But no. He was a warrior. He was Vear. He would not be overcome. We're leaving, Zoren growled, turning back to the console. His hands trembled as he tried to engage the ship's systems once more, but nothing responded. The screens flickered, but they offered no hope. The controls were dead. The ship was trapped, they were trapped. Vorn's voice came again, softer this time, almost pleading. We can't leave, Commander. We're too far gone. The humans, they've already changed us. Zoren spun around, his face a mask of fury. No! He bellowed, his voice thunderous. You will not give in. You will not succumb to them. But as he said the words, he could feel it too. His own body was betraying him, pulling him in the same direction as his men, as Cormor. The fire. The hunger. The need to become. Cormor's laughter grew louder, more unhinged. You're already one of us, Zoren. You just don't want to admit it. He stepped forward, his eyes wild. The moment you set foot on this cursed planet, you were already lost. Zoren's hands clenched into fists. He had spent his life fighting. Fighting for survival. Fighting for his people. But now, the very essence of who he was being torn apart, piece by piece. He had no answers. No plan. All he knew was that he was slipping, and the harder he fought, the deeper he sank into the abyss. No, Zoren whispered to himself, more to his soul than to anyone else. I will not become one of them. His vision blurred, his body heavy with the pull of the infection. It wasn't just physical anymore. It was in his mind, in his very thoughts, changing him from within. He had been a god of war, a conqueror. And now, he was being undone by a force far greater than he could ever comprehend. But just as he thought he might fall, just as he felt himself sinking into the madness, something in him snapped. A surge of anger. A rush of clarity. He was Vear. He was Zoren. And no matter how deeply the whispers ran, he would not let them define him. With a roar, Zoren lunged at Cormor, his blade flashing through the air. The rage, the raw fury of a warrior fighting for his very soul, drove him forward. Cormor's laughter faltered, but it was too late. Zoren's blade cut through the madness, slicing through the distortion in his friend's face. For a moment, the gleam of recognition flickered in Cormor's eyes, then the light faded. His body crumpled to the floor. Zoren stood over him, his breath heavy, his heart racing. He had done it. He had struck down the madness, the infection that had claimed his soldiers. But as he looked down at the lifeless body of his friend, he realized the truth. He had won. But he was already lost. The whispers were louder now, echoing in every corner of his mind. And though he had struck down one of them, he could feel the pull intensifying, claiming him inch by inch. He could still hear Cormor's voice, soft in the back of his mind, urging him to join them. Become one of them. The moment he had dreaded had arrived. He had defeated the external enemy. But now, the real battle had begun, the battle for his very soul. Zoren stood alone in the heart of the ship, surrounded by the unnatural hum of the corrupted vessel. His breath was ragged, his eyes bloodshot and wild. His mind was a battlefield, the whispers clawing at him, urging him to surrender. He could feel the infection spreading through his veins, warping his thoughts, bending his will. His heart pounded with a growing urgency, as if the very ship itself was alive and aware of the internal struggle he was facing. He clenched his fists, his knuckles white against the metal of his gauntlets. Every part of him screamed for him to give in, to let go. But Zoren refused to listen. He was a warrior, and warriors never surrender, not even when they are outmatched, not even when they are broken. The ship shuddered beneath his feet, a reminder that it was no longer the vessel he had known. It had changed, just like his soldiers, just like him. It was no longer a tool of war, it was a prison. And they were all trapped inside it. Zoren staggered to the control panel, his hands trembling as he reached for the keys. His vision blurred, a mix of anger and fear flooding his senses. The ship's systems refused to cooperate, flashing error messages in a language he didn't recognize. The madness of the ship, the madness of his soldiers, was reflected in the chaos of the controls. "Commander," Vorn's voice echoed from behind him, a soft, broken whisper. Zoren didn't turn around. He couldn't face his men, not now, not like this. "Vorn," he croaked, his throat dry. "What's happening to us?" Vorn's footsteps were hesitant, as if he were walking on the edge of a precipice. I don't know, sir. I feel it too. It's inside me. Inside all of us. The whispers, they want us to join them, to become like them." His voice cracked, fear seeping through. "But I can't stop hearing it. I can't stop feeling it." Zoren swallowed hard, his hands gripping the console as if it could somehow ground him. "We will stop it," he said, his voice low, filled with determination. "I won't let it consume us." He had to believe that. There had to be a way out. A way to fight this. But the more he thought about it, the more he felt the weight of the truth pressing down on him. They were too far gone. They were beyond saving. And the ship, they were inside it, tangled in its corrupting influence, no different than the soldiers who had already lost themselves. "I thought we were stronger than this," Vorn whispered. "I thought we were, the conquerors." Zoren's gaze softened for just a moment, and for the first time since they had arrived, he allowed himself to acknowledge the weight of the situation. They weren't conquerors. They weren't gods. They were men. Mortal beings who had thought themselves invincible, who had underestimated the power of the one force they could never comprehend. Humanity. Zoren had seen the strength of humanity before, he had witnessed it in battle, had heard of their ability to endure, to rise from the ashes time and time again. But he had never understood it until now. Humans didn't conquer. They didn't destroy. They simply survived. They consumed everything around them, not out of malice, but because it was their nature. It was what made them so terrifying. So unstoppable. Zoren's mind reeled as the truth washed over him. The Vear had feared humans not because of their strength, but because of their endurance. They couldn't be wiped out. No matter what you did, no matter how hard you fought, they would always come back. They would always survive. And in doing so, they would infect and consume everything around them. It was too late for them. The infection had already taken root. He closed his eyes, his head swimming with the realization. He had led his people here, led them into the heart of humanity's territory, thinking he could control it, thinking he could bend it to his will. But now, it was clear. They were already lost. His soldiers had already fallen. The dread talons, once the fiercest warriors in the galaxy, were now nothing more than shadows of their former selves. And now, he was no better. The infection had taken root in him, just as it had in them. "Commander," Vorn said again, his voice quieter now, as if he were waiting for something. Waiting for a command, waiting for a sign. But Zoren had nothing to offer him. There was no way out, no escape from the inevitable. Zoren opened his eyes, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. "It's over, Vorn." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Vorn didn't reply. He didn't have to. They both knew the truth. The dread talons were gone. The Vear were gone. And now, humanity had claimed them. The infection had spread too far. Zoren took one last look at the ship's controls. The navigation system remained dead, the engines hummed nothing more than a hollow echo. There was no escape. There was nothing left to fight. Zoren, Vorn whispered, his voice shaking. We're not going to survive, are we? Zoren didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. The answer was already in the air. The whispers had already consumed them. They were already part of something far greater than themselves. We were never meant to, Zoren said finally, his voice hollow. We were never meant to conquer. We were only meant to survive. A long silence followed. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. The reality of their situation had settled in like a heavy fog, suffocating them, drowning them in the inevitability of their fate. And then, as the last remnants of his will crumbled, Zoren felt the pull again. This time, it wasn't just in his mind. It was in his very bones. The fire, the hunger, it consumed him from the inside out. It was no longer something he could fight. It was something he had become. He felt it. The transformation. The change. The infection. The ship, his legacy, began to hum with a new energy. It was no longer just a vessel. It was alive, pulsing with the same hunger that had overtaken them all. The walls seemed to breathe with the same rhythm as his heart, the same twisted, primal beat. Join us, Zoren, the whispers murmured. Become one of us. Become human. Zoren fell to his knees, his breath ragged, his vision blurring. The infection had fully taken him. He had become one of them. He had become human. And as the last fragments of his will slipped away, he finally understood what the Ancient Ones had feared. Humanity didn't just survive. It consumed. And in doing so, it became. His last thought, before everything faded to black, was simple. We were wrong. The whispers, now his own, echoed in the dark. We were wrong about humanity. The screen cut to black, and the transmission ended. And somewhere, deep in the galaxy, a voice, Zoren's voice, whispered through the void, corrupted, but unmistakably his. We're coming home.